Now the war has begun, and we're governed by those rules governing the conduct of war. Jus in bello, international lawyers call it international humanitarian law. If you talk to guys in the U.S. military, they'll call it the law of armed conflict. And there's a quite elaborate set of rules that govern the conduct of warfare. Three basic principles I'll give you. I mean, again, it's many. I have a shelf here that I could show you that's full of long books on the law of armed conflict, but three basic principles. I tell my students, if you know these three basic principles, you'll understand really sort of the foundations of the law of war. First is the principle of distinction, which is to say, in wartime, there are combatants and there are civilians. And you can only direct military attacks against combatants. It is forbidden to target civilians or civilian objects. That's the first principle, the principle of distinction. Now, sometimes let's say the United States is engaged in a war. The Pentagon is undoubtedly a permissible military target. It sits in Pentagon City. It's surrounded by shopping malls. It's surrounded by, a dense urban environment. So an attack against the Pentagon would also cause civilian harm, even though that civilian harm is even though you're not aiming at civilians, you know that civilians are going to be injured. Second key principle here is the principle of proportionality. This is different from the jus ad bellum principle of proportionality, which is focusing on the overall harm. This is jus in bello proportionality. And what that principle says is that for every attack, the commander has to ensure that the unintended but foreseeable civilian harm is outweighed by the military advantage. It's only if the military advantage outweighs the anticipated civilian harm that you can carry out the attack. Again, apples and oranges. How do I balance military advantage on the one hand against civilian harm? It's tricky, right? This is always a challenge, but that's the basic concept. And then the third principle is the principle of precaution, which is that you're supposed to take all feasible measures to try to minimize harm to civilians. Now, I think there are really significant questions, right, about Israel's military operations and about Russia's military operations with respect to these principles. Russia has been targeting energy infrastructure, right? I think it claims that this is energy infrastructure, which is, energy that is meant to support the Ukrainian, military, but they're basically, shutting out the lights for major population centers. It's quite clear that, in fact, they're either aiming at these energy infrastructure targets because they are civilian and they want to punish like Ukrainian civilians, or if there is some kind of military justification for it, these attacks fail the test of proportionality because the civilian harm that is being suffered outweighs the military advantage.